It's your favorite NPC, and today I will teach you Claude Code. Claude Code is breaking the internet right now, and for a reason. Developers who know how to use it are shipping within hours what used to take days or even weeks. It is the biggest shift in how software gets built in decades. The problem is that most people are just scratching the surface and stopping there. They learn a few commands, run a prompt, get confused when something doesn't work, and give up. They never touch the part that makes Claude Code actually powerful. The configuration layer, the agent, the skills and commands that turn it from a tool into a workflow that works for you specifically. If you understand how Claude AI works, it is almost as if you had a team of software developers that work for you whenever you need them. This course teaches you the whole system, from first install to shipping an entire web project using Claude AI as your main tool. What makes this course different is that we go deep on the system, not just the surface. You will learn how to write a CLAUDE.md file that makes Claude Code understand your project from session 1. How to build agents that handle complete workflows on their own. How to create skills and commands that you can use on every single project that you will ever do. Most courses on Claude Code do not go here. We cover installation and your first session, the CLAUDE.md file, settings and permissions, all 7 tools, read, write, edit, bash, glob, grep, and the agent tool, then agents, skills and commands, modes in general, model selection and effective prompting. While doing that, we will build multiple projects together. A simple coffee website built within minutes, a full workout plan website with different workout plans and food recipes, and a full stack chat application that allows users to register, log in, and chat with their friends. By the end of this course, you will understand the power of Claude Code. So let's get started, guys. A recent benchmark showed Claude reached knowledge above expert level, above PhD. Amazon put $4 billion into it. Google put in $2 billion. It outperforms every other chatbot, and it does so by using a system that no other AI company uses. The creator of Claude Code, Boris Journey, says coding is solved. Claude Code now writes 100% of his code. But what actually is Claude Code? And is the hype actually worth it? Claude Code is Anthropic's chat agent. It's not a classic chat window you paste into. It's an agent that lives inside your actual project. It can read all of your files, write new ones, edit code, run commands, and test your entire project. You describe a task in plain English and it does the work. But in comparison to ChatGPT, for example, it will not stop if something doesn't work. It will try again and again until it does work. Claude Code runs on Claude. It uses a context window, which is comparable to your memory, to remember your entire code base at once. If you ask it to create a website, for example, it will start and not stop until your website has been fully created. If you ask it to read, summarize, and reply to all of your emails, it will start and will not stop until all of your emails have been answered. If you ask it to search the web, find potential customers, and store all of them inside of an Excel sheet, it will start and not stop until the task has been fulfilled. So is the hype worth it? Mostly, yes, with one restriction. It's a tool, not magic. The developers who get the most out of it are the ones who know how to set it up and especially how to direct it properly. Without knowledge, it's just a normal chatbot. With knowledge, it's almost as if you have a team of developers working for you whenever you need them. Let's get started by setting Claude Code up, so installing it. If you want to use Claude Code, you have to get the Pro version at least. The Pro version costs $17, but I can guarantee you that it's definitely worth it. I'm personally using Max because I'm really using it a lot, but I think if you're just using it from time to time, Pro should be enough in the beginning and you can later always upgrade to Max. For me, it personally increased my productivity in almost all areas. So once you have your subscription, there exist a couple of different ways to use Claude Code. And I definitely recommend you, if you want to use it for coding, to use it inside of Visual Studio Code. So that is the way that we're going to use it. I'm first going to show you how to set it up, and then I will explain you what exactly Visual Studio Code is and why we use it there. To install Visual Studio Code, let's just enter Visual Studio Code right here inside of Google. Then you just press the first link right here. And right here, we just press download for Windows. This will start your download, so the setup right here. And once the setup has been downloaded, let's just click this right here. Now we have to accept the agreement. Next, you have to check those 2 checkboxes. Next, and now you can just press install right here. And this will set up Visual Studio Code for you on your computer. Once done, we can just press finish, and this should open Visual Studio Code for you. And when you open it, it should look somewhat like this. If you don't see this bar right here, so this left sidebar, then you just have to press this Explorer icon right here, and this will open or close the Explorer. So this Explorer right here is pretty important, because now we can just press Open Folder. And when using Claude Code, you always want to create a project folder. And your entire project then lives within this single project folder. So this is essentially the place where you store your files and all of the stuff that belongs to this Claude AI project. So let's go, and I'm going to create that folder on my desktop. I want to create a new folder for this project. So I'm going to right-click, New Folder, Claude AI Course, for example. Of course, the name is up to you, but I think this fits right here. And I'm just going to select this folder right here, and this will open Visual Studio Code within this folder. So right now, you can see that it opened Visual Studio Code, and this is my project. And now I can just create new files inside of this folder by just using this new file button right here or new folders. So I could, for example, create a subfolder inside of my project folder, like so, and that could have the name whatever. I could also create a normal text file, so whatever.txt, and so on. And if you take a look at the original folder right here, you can see that I now also created this folder inside of this folder, so inside of my project folder, and I also have this text file inside. Now I can delete it right here as well, and it will also update that change inside of Visual Studio Code, as you can see. But now we want to use Claude Code inside of this project folder for our entire project. So how can we install Claude Code? And that is really simple. We just go to this extensions tab right here inside of Visual Studio Code. So we press this icon, and now you just enter Claude Code right here, and this will search Claude Code. And then you have to press this version right here, so Claude Code for VS Code essentially, and you will have an install button right here. I've got it installed already, so I don't have to press it again, but you just press this install button right here, this will install it, and then you should be good to go. And once installed, you should essentially have this icon right here, this Claude Code icon right here. If you don't, just restart Visual Studio Code, and after restarting, you should just have it right here. So now we can just press Claude Code right here, and we have the option to create a new session. So I can just press New Session right here. This will create a new session, and inside of the session, I can now chat with Claude Code. So I could, for example, ask him, hey, how is the weather, for example? And now he will just think, and he says, I don't have access to real-time weather data or your location, so I can't check the weather for you. So I see it's essentially just a normal chatbot. Right now, he probably doesn't have access to my location, but that's fine. So up to this point, it looks pretty similar to any normal chatbot. So similar to ChatGPT and so on. So what is the difference now? The difference is that Claude Code can access our entire project within this folder. So Claude Code can read all of the files that sit inside of this folder. Claude Code can modify, so change all of the files inside of this folder. And he can also create files, use commands, so use CMD commands, for example, and also access other programs like Gmail, Excel, Word, and so on. It can generate PDFs, images, it can scrape the web, it can literally do pretty much anything you can imagine. And even if you're not great at writing code or never coded in your life before, you can still use Claude Code and get really, really good results. Of course, it's probably a little bit better if you at least understand a little bit of what Claude Code is doing, because then you can write better instructions. But I would say it's not even necessary. It's probably slightly better, but nevertheless, you will get great results. And also, if you don't know too much about websites, for example, and web development in general, you can always ask Claude Code, and he will explain every single step he does to you and why it is probably the best step. So even if you don't know a lot in the beginning, by chatting with Claude Code, you will learn a lot over the time. So I think it's not just great to boost your productivity, but it's also a great tool to learn over time. So now let me show you why this is really a great tool. I can now just instruct it to create a basic coffee shop website, for example, for me. So I could, for example, say, please create a basic coffee shop website for me. Choose whatever tools you like and whatever color scheme you like. Now I'm just going to press enter, and you can see it now starts to create something. So it's thinking. You also see what exactly he is doing at the moment. So right here you can see that he said that he will build a single page coffee shop website with a warm espresso brown color scheme, and he is now starting to create a file. So now he is essentially working right here. And right here you can also see once he creates something that it will add a couple of files right here inside of our folder. So Claude Code is actually able to add new files and modify files inside of this folder, which you will see in a second. And you can see our project has been created. So inside of our main project folder, so Claude AI course, it created another subfolder, so coffee minus shop. And inside of this subfolder, we have an index.html file. And you can see it wrote a lot of code right here. So at the moment, we have probably, let's take a look. Yeah, we have almost 500 lines of code. So if I would have been the person to write this code, it would probably take me a couple of hours. But Claude Code literally wrote all of this within probably 1 or 2 minutes, I would say. So it took me probably 1 or 2 minutes. And now I can just open this project right here by going to my project folder. So the project folder where my coffee shop folder, so subfolder is in, so Claude AI course. Now I open the coffee shop folder. And right here, I have my index file. And now I can just double click this file right here. And you can see this here is what has been created by Claude AI, like so. So I think this here really looks pretty great. And I didn't really give it a lot of instruction. You can see if I click the nav bar, we also have this nice scroll effect. So we can scroll to a certain section. And I can already tell you, if I would have to write this code for this entire website, so all of the CSS, the HTML, and also test it to get this result, I would probably spend around, probably 5 to 6 hours. Now you might wonder, can I customize this? Can I also define a color scheme? So could I use different colors? Could I also adjust the text right here? Could I maybe also create a better workflow that does not only create an index.html, but also a style.css and index.js? You don't have to know this yet, but this here is not the best way to write HTML code. So for all of you who don't have any experience with HTML, usually you would separate your style sheet and your JavaScript code. So I didn't do this right here and wrote everything into a single file. So probably that isn't best practice. So can I change all of those things? Could I instruct Claude Code to essentially make everything even better and adjust every single thing according to my needs or according to the needs of a customer? And throughout this course, I will teach you how to do all of this so you get the best results, you get the result that you're looking for, and also how to set up Claude Code so it will also do in the future and remember in the future what exactly you need, so you can instruct him to get the result you like within a couple lines of text. So for now, let me just close this page right here. Let me get back to Claude AI right here. Let me also delete this coffee shop website because I do not really need it anymore. I think you got the idea. And let me now start to introduce you to the most important file when using Claude AI. The most important file that you always want to create when you start a new session is the Claude.md file. And MD stands for Markdown. So that is always the first file that you want to create when you set up a new Claude AI project. You could also ask Claude AI to create this file for you, or you can create it yourself. I most of the times create it myself, but again, you could also ask Claude AI to create a Claude.md file for your needs, like so. And for now, let me explain the structure of a Claude.md file to you by first of all showing the structure of a Claude.md file to you. So let me just paste in a little bit of code, and that is what a Claude.md file can look like. Every Claude.md file looks slightly different, and usually you don't really write them yourself. You either go online and take a look at what other developers have, or you write it by using AI, then you test it, you see whether it works. If it works, you keep it like that. If it is not perfect yet, you essentially ask AI, or in our case, we could just ask Claude to modify it the way we like. Then we test it again. If it works good now, we keep it like that. If there is still a small problem, we again could ask Claude to essentially modify our file. So that is how this works, but I will show you in a second. For now, let's first of all take a look at the structure of this file. And I actually created this file on my own, so together with Claude essentially, for the workflow that I think is the best one for web development. And for a lot of projects in general, in my opinion. You will also find this file in the description below. So if you want to use the exact same rules for your project, feel free to use them as well. But again, let me explain this to you now. So right here, inside of the Claude.md file, I define a project pattern. So I essentially said that this project follows the orchestrator agent skill pattern. So right here, I essentially define the pattern that I want to use in this project. And I will explain this pattern later on to you. Next up, I define the general folder structure that I want to use inside of this project. So that is the structure that I want to have in this project. So I have this Claude.md file right here. I will also add .getignore, .env, and then I will add this .claude folder. And actually, most people who use Claude AI these days will follow a structure that is similar to that one. And this .claude folder is a folder that pretty much all developers use at the moment, because that is also the structure that the Claude team suggests on their website. So this here is a pretty common structure. Nevertheless, all you really have to understand at the moment is that we just defined a folder structure for this entire project right here. Right here, we define core rules. For example, keep responsibilities separated, create separate files when separation improves clarity, maintainability, or reuse. So essentially, we again give a couple of instructions how we want our project to be structured and created. Then we have file header conventions. So again, a couple of conventions. Here we have naming conventions, right? If we scroll down, we have file responsibilities. So we define our file responsibilities. And right here, we define our agents. Let's keep scrolling. We define our skills. Again, you don't have to understand any of this, but all you really have to know is that we just define a lot of stuff right here for our project. So templates, commands, environment variables, Git. I essentially just say how I want to handle all of those things. For example, here I say my variables should belong in the .env file and should always get Git ignored because I don't want to push them to GitHub and so on. Right here, I also define the use of Git. So I want to add a Git ignore file in case I ever decide to push it to GitHub. Default workflow. So I instruct Claude AI essentially how it should work, and also instruction priority. So to say it in one sentence, this file is essentially just an instruction to Claude AI how it should set up our project, how it should do certain tasks, how it should respond, for example, and especially how it should work for us in general. So those are the instructions that we give to Claude AI. And this language that you use right here is called Markdown language. So this is just a special language essentially, and it's pretty similar to plain text. So essentially this is just a file format that you can use to describe what you want to do, for example, to Claude AI. So essentially what Claude AI should do for us. Again, you don't have to understand this too much because Claude AI will update this Markdown file anyways for you whenever you instruct it to do so. So for example, imagine I think that this Claude.md file is complete trash. So I could say Claude.md file is trash, delete everything, and only use a max of 50 lines to describe a better workflow, for example. Of course, this doesn't make too much sense for now, but this will show you that Claude AI is able to edit our file, so our Claude.md file, when we tell it what we don't like about it, for example. And of course, this description was pretty bad, but I could, for example, say that I don't like this agent pattern, or I don't like the rules, and so on. And you can see now, it updated our Claude.md file, and we only have 35 lines of code right here. So it deleted a lot and just wrote its own Claude.md file, essentially, in a way that is kind of right, according to what he thinks. But for now, I will keep my own structure, so the structure I had previously. And let me again demonstrate the purpose of this file a little bit better to you by taking a look at this image right here. So as you can see, the Claude.md file defines the anatomy of a project instruction file. So right here, you also see the structure of my file. So at the top, I essentially define a project pattern. Right below, I define a folder structure. Right below, I define my agents, and agents are specialized roles, but we will get to them later on. I also define my skills. So skills define reusable workflows. We will get to them later on as well. And I also define a default workflow. And that one tells Claude what to do in every single task. Again, this is just an example of a Claude.md file. Your Claude.md file could be completely different, but a Claude.md file is essentially just the instruction that you give your Claude AI on how it should behave and how it should create your project. So what structure and how should it work? And right here, you can also see how exactly Claude AI works. So when you define a Claude.md file, Claude AI will first of all read this Claude.md file even before it reads your prompt. So if you say, hey, create me a website and just be creative, do whatever you like, for example, if I would now press enter, it would first of all take a look at the Claude.md file, so essentially at this file right here. Afterwards, it would read our prompt and then it would start to generate. So whenever we send this prompt right here, it will always first of all read the Claude.md file and afterwards the prompt. So the Claude.md file will always be sent as well. And this Claude.md file there is essentially the core instruction for our entire project. So Claude AI will always behave according to this Claude.md file, no matter the prompt we use. Then it will generate. Afterwards, we usually give feedback and Claude AI will improve. But again, we are not here yet. We will get to that later on. So the only thing that is important is that every time you send a prompt, under the hood, you will also send the Claude.md file to Claude AI, and Claude AI will keep those things, so those definitions right here, into consideration when generating. So that is important to know. Now it is important that you understand the tool architecture inside of Claude AI. So usually we have instruction files. That is our Claude.md file. So in general, we will also see different instruction files other than the Claude.md file, but they will all have the exact same structure. The only difference will later on be the name and essentially the kinds of instructions we give. But again, all of them will have the exact same structure as our Claude.md file. So the Claude.md file is an instruction file because it essentially instructs our AI to do certain things. And the AI, so Claude AI, which essentially in the end executes those instructions, is what you call the agent inside of Claude AI. So the agent will execute the instructions. For example, if you say, build me a website, then the agent is essentially the person or the machine, whatever you want to say about it, that in the end executes those instructions. So the agent builds the website, for example. So the agent also reasons and acts. If you think about instructions, they're probably similar to a recipe when you're cooking, and the agent is similar to the chef who executes the recipe. And then you also have tools. Tools can be pretty much everything that the agent uses to execute the task, so to get a good result. That could be a Python file, for example, if you're doing automation. So a tool is something that the agent can use to execute the task. And especially in automation, the tool is oftentimes a Python file. But that, of course, really depends on the task. In web development, a tool would, for example, be Visual Studio Code, it would be Git, it would be npm, it would be the command line. You don't need to understand too much of this, but essentially a tool just helps the agent to execute the task. So if you think about cooking, for example, a tool would be a spoon, a tool would be a pot, and so on. And this is the core structure of Claude AI. So if you understand this, you already understand a really, really big part. The agent executes the task, the instruction file tells the agent how to execute the task, and the tools are anything that the agent can use to get the best result possible. And the agent is also possible to use those tools and also to generate those tools. So he does not only use them, he also updates them, improves the quality of the tools, and then uses the tools. And the same also works for the instruction files. He does not only use the instruction files, you can also give the agent feedback later on, and then the agent will update and improve the quality of the instruction files. So the agent improves the quality of instruction files and tools and uses them to create the best result for you possible. And now I will show you the difference to our first project when using the Claude.md file and instructing our agent to use the instructions from the Claude.md file to create a website. Of course, he can also use all the tools necessary that he needs to create that website. So I'm going to say, create a coffee shop website once again, but make sure to keep our rules defined in the Claude.md file into consideration and follow the defined file structure. Also make sure to set the entire project up according to the defined rules, for example. And now I'm just going to press enter, and this will execute whatever I have right here. So this will execute this command. And you can see it again starts to think. Right here, we have those random words as well. If you're wondering what exactly they are, they don't really make too much sense. They're just random words in the end. But right here, it will always tell you what exactly it does. So it reads the current Claude.md file first, then sets everything up properly. So right now, you can see it read the Claude.md file right here, so this file. It thought for a couple of seconds, and it starts to create those files, as you can see right here. So now we already have a .env, we have a git ignore, and now it also asks me whether I want to allow to write to my folder essentially and create the settings.json. I'm going to press yes, and you can see it now created this .claude folder. It also created the settings.json, and now it updates tools. It does a lot of stuff, creates template, creates skills, create rules, create agents. So all of the stuff that I created inside of my, or defined to be precise, inside of my Claude.md folder, I have to allow it to write into that folder again. I press yes. It created an agents folder. I press yes again. It created the rules folder. I probably have to press yes again. So yeah, for the skills folder. And now I have to approve essentially the creation of every single folder. And we will also understand how we could skip this step later on in case you don't want to press yes every single time. But for now, this is fine. And now it builds a coffee shop website. It created an index.html file inside of this outputs folder likely, because that should be what I defined. So now you can see we have outputs. Inside of outputs, we have the coffee shop website right here. And at the moment, we only have a git ignore website in there because it's still working. So now it should work on creating our website in general. Now you can already see that we created an index.html, a script.js, and a style.css file. So now, instead of only having an index.html, we also have a style.css and a script.js file. And for those of you who don't even know what HTML, CSS, and JavaScript is, I will explain to you in a second what everything does. But for now, let's first of all take a look at the website. So I can first of all open my folder right here. And right here, I now have this outputs folder because that was the structure that I defined for my project. And I also told Claude AI that I want all of the outputs, so all of the results essentially, inside of this outputs folder in the end. So it created this outputs folder for me. And now my coffee shop website is inside of this outputs folder. So now I can just open coffee shop right here. And again, right here, I have my index file, I have my script.js and my style file. And now I can just double click my index file. And this is what my coffee shop website looks like for now. So I think it also looks pretty good. And for most of you, you will not see too much of a difference. But I can already tell you from a developer's perspective, it is a lot better to separate HTML, CSS, and JavaScript and have this kind of file structure right here, where you also have a git ignore, a .env, and so on. So even though the result might not look a lot better at first, it is a much better way to write your code. At this point in time, we only improved the quality of our code, but over the next lessons, we will also improve how our websites look. So we will make them look a lot better and also adjust them according to our personal preference. But for now, it's only important that you understand that by using this Claude.md file, we can instruct Claude AI to do anything we like. And we can also get it to write code that is a lot cleaner and a lot more maintainable. So let me now, just for those of you who never heard of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, within 2 minutes explain the absolute basics. So what is HTML for, what is CSS for, and what is JavaScript for? HTML essentially defines the structure of a website. So it defines where you have what. Where is a title, where is some text, where is an image, for example. If you take a look at this page, it, for example, defines that you have a heading right here, that you have a little bit of text right here, that you have a link right here, and that you have an image right here. So it defines the structure. Then you use CSS. And CSS defines styling. So essentially, what color should a heading have? How much spacing should it have? So how much space to the left, to the right? Should it be aligned to the left? Should it be aligned to the center? Should it be aligned to the right? So it essentially defines all of the styling. Right here, it, for example, also defines that this image here is sitting next to this paragraph, so next to this text, for example. It defines the spacing between those elements. It defines the background color. It defines the color of this heading. It defines anything that belongs to styling. So HTML defines the structure. What kind of elements do you have? And CSS defines the styling. So where do these elements sit? What is the color of those elements? And so on. And then you have JavaScript. And JavaScript adds interactivity. So what should happen if a user clicks on this element, for example? So maybe if I click on a button or submit a form, what exactly should happen? Maybe if I click on this heading right here, I maybe want to change the color from yellow to blue. And that is JavaScript. So JavaScript adds interactivity and essentially allows users to interact with your website. And for most basic websites, use those technologies to define the front end of a website. And the front end is essentially everything the user sees. You also have the back end, and the back end essentially defines everything that belongs to data. So where should the data be stored? How should it be stored? How do you validate data? And so on. But again, you don't have to understand all of this right now. Just remember HTML structure, CSS styling, so how does it look, JavaScript interactivity. And now I instructed Claude AI to use HTML for the front end, CSS for styling, and JavaScript for interactivity. And I want those three things to be separated because that is common practice and also best practice. So I don't want to write everything into one single file, so into one single index.html file, because that is bad practice. And it would actually be even better practice if we take a look at our coffee shop right here to essentially separate about, menu, process, and visit. So it would be best practice to have one page for about, so an about.html, one page for menu, so menu.html, one page for process, so process.html, and one page for visit, so visit.html. And it would also be best practice to have one style sheet and one JavaScript file for all of those pages. So one style sheet that, for example, only creates the style for your about page, another style sheet that only creates the styles for the menu page, and so on. And that is something that you usually do not define inside of your Claude.md file. Your Claude.md file, so this file right here, only defines how your agent should behave across the entire project. But now, technically, you could go down here and say web development, so something like this, web dev. And right here, you could now say use HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And now you could also say create one file for every single page, and so on. But again, this does not really belong into the Claude.md file. The Claude.md file should set a general outline for your entire project. So it should define the workflow for pretty much anything you do, not only for web development, not only for automation. It defines how the agent works in general. If you want to create rules for specific tasks, you always want to use the rules folder. So now we have this web.md right here that Claude automatically generated because my Claude.md file instructs Claude AI, so my agent, to always add something, so MD files essentially, when I create a new task or do a new task. And those MD files right here now define my web development rules. So right here, I now have rules for web development. Since I think I was probably not precise enough, my Claude.md file instructs my agent to always define rules if there occurs a new task. So a task like web development, for example. And then my agent will make sure if that file doesn't exist yet to create that file and define rules inside of this MD file for a specific task inside of the rules folder. So now inside of the rules folder, we have my web.md file. So the instructions here essentially define the general behavior. And the general behavior is, if you don't know something about a specific task, define how you can solve this task inside of the rules section. So here, general behavior, here, specific behavior. And now I can also go to Claude AI and say web.md is not perfect yet. I want you to create separate files for every single page on my website in the future, for example. So home should have its own HTML, CSS, and JS file. Menu, for example, as well, about as well, and so on. So every single page, like so. And also separate them into individual folders. So one folder for the HTML files, one for CSS, and one for JS. And now I can just press enter. You can see it is working again. The general Claude.md file again defines the general rules on how it should behave, so on how it should update those rules. And now it will use those general rules to do modifications to our specific rules in the web.md file. It asks me whether I want to allow those edits, so I'm going to press yes. You can see it now wants to change those things right here. I'm again going to press yes, doesn't really matter too much. I'm again going to press yes. Also, it right here tries to create a skill, but again, you do not have to understand skills yet. It's important that you understand that we're just updating those rules right here. And now it essentially created rules for HTML. So use semantic elements. Every image must have a meaningful alt attribute and so on. And you can see if we scroll down, it updated the output structure. So now we have an HTML folder. Inside of this folder, we have index.html, menu.html, about.html. So it understands the folder. Same goes for CSS and JavaScript. So it essentially updated the folder structure. And if I now ask it, let me just press yes. And now I can just ask it to, for example, create this project or this coffee shop project once again, but use the correct folder structure. And now it is done. And something that I want to show you as well is talk mode right here. So up to this point, I wrote essentially everything, but it's much faster to just use this mode right here. So to talk to Claude AI, because you can talk a lot faster than you can read. So this makes you a lot more efficient. So now I could, for example, say, thanks for modifying. I want you to create the exact same coffee shop website with a different color scheme right now. So delete the old files and create new files. So new HTML, CSS, and JavaScript files to create the coffee shop website once again. But this time, use the new defined folder structure instead of the web.md file. Now I can just press enter. So let me delete this. Also, it didn't get MD file right here. And now I'm just going to press enter. And you can see it will again start to work. So again, while we are waiting, I want to make this clear again. The general rules for your entire project will be defined inside of the Claude.md file. And rules will always get defined for specific tasks. So I could have a web.md file. I could also have a frontend.md file for front-end web development and a back-end web.md file for back-end web development. Or oftentimes you want to use frameworks like React, for example, for the front-end. And then I could also set up rules for front-end web development using React or any other technology. So I can use those files right here to define different rules for different tasks. So I think you get the idea. And of course, this is not limited to web development. This applies to pretty much anything. If you want to do automation, the exact same applies. Of course, then you might not have a web.md file. Then you might have an MD file for automating writing emails, for example, or automation for applying to jobs. So I think you get the idea. And then you will define those rules instead of those files. So now you can see that the project is essentially done. So we now have our coffee shop, but now compared to previously, we have one folder for CSS, one for HTML, and one for JavaScript. And you can see inside of the JavaScript folder, we have 4 files inside of the JavaScript folder, we have 4 files inside of the HTML folder, and 4 files inside of the CSS folder. So this structure, from a developer's point of view, is a lot better than the structure previously. You might not see the biggest difference if I now open the HTML page. Let's take a look at that one. So let's open index. So I wouldn't even say that it's a better look. But again, from a developer's point of view, the structure of this website is a lot better. We still have menu, about, and visit right here. So I think you get the idea. And now during the next lectures, we will work on making it look a lot better. So we're getting there as well. So let me close this right here and let's go back to Visual Studio Code. Let's now take a look at the improvement loop. And the improvement loop is essentially the cycle you repeat in every single session. So usually, every time you work with Claude AI, you start with a prompt. So essentially say, for example, create a website for me. So you describe exactly what you want. Afterwards, Claude AI takes that prompt and then starts to execute. So Claude does all of the work for you. Later on, you review that output. So you check the result, and after checking the result, you give some feedback. That could be via text, but could also be via images. And especially images play an important role. And we will see how this works later on as well. And then you essentially prompt that feedback. So you again describe what you want, what kind of changes do you want, and Claude AI will execute again. So you have a loop in the end. And with every single iteration, the project or the product gets better and better. So it's important to know that the product is usually not perfect and oftentimes not even good after one single iteration. You have to iterate, and Claude AI will also adjust all of the files, so all of your instructions and all of the tools usually. And with every single iteration, it will not only update the product, but it will also update the instructions and tools for the future. So the more you use Claude AI, the better it gets, not only for one single project, but across all of your projects. And that is important to know. And if you take a look at this example right here, so the project that we built up to this point, you can see that we started with a simple coffee website that only had a single index.html page. But right now, we already have rules right here. We also updated those rules. We have a Claude.md file that defines how Claude should work inside of this project. And we can now iterate over and over again and also update our web.md or also add more and more rules. And therefore, the quality will improve over and over again. So let me show you exactly what I mean by taking a look at our previous website again. So right here, you can see that this here is a website that is kind of alright. But maybe I don't like the color scheme. Maybe I also don't like the spacing right here. Maybe I don't really like a lot of stuff. So now I could, for example, use the improvement loop to create the result for this version right here. And I could, of course, also say that I want updates instead of my web.md file. So I could also say that we want to add rules, for example, to that file that define what Claude AI should probably not do anymore in the future. And usually you don't define too many rules that explicitly tell Claude AI how to work. So you don't really add a step-by-step plan inside of the rules files, because that usually belongs into skills. We'll get there later on, but rules are essentially do's and don'ts. So for example, it could be something like, don't only use a single page. So that kind of stuff. But for now, let's focus on improving the quality. And now something that I can do is just press this icon right here. So I can now tap or hold to record. So now it's recording. And now I can prompt it. At the moment, I don't really like the color scheme. So I would like you to use a brown color scheme for that website. Also, I will send you an image of the header. I don't think that the spacing to the left is correct. I think the entire page would look a lot better if the text and the buttons of the header would be centered on the homepage. I think the rest looks pretty much alright on the homepage. If I now go to the menu page, again, of course, you have to update the color scheme as well. But for the rest, I think that looks pretty much alright as well. The about page is pretty much good as well. The color scheme needs to be updated, of course, and visit the exact same. Only the color scheme needs to be updated. I think the rest is kind of alright. Now I'm going to stop recording. I can delete this part because there I just said I'm recording. And now it's always good to also use visual feedback. So now I could, for example, just create a screenshot right here, because I also mentioned the screenshot. And right here, I want this text to be centered. So I'm going to add that right here. Now I can, for example, just press enter. And now it should update. So now it starts to think and it starts to add those adjustments to your page. And you can see our page has now been updated. So now I'm going to open this folder again. Let me double click the index page. And you can see it made those changes for us. This here is still pretty much terrible. So again, I have to screenshot this right here. I'm going to send a screenshot inside of Visual Studio Code to Claude AI. And now let's scroll down. You can see the color scheme is pretty much alright. So I think that looks a little bit better already, like so. So it updated the color scheme on pretty much all of those pages. So that seems to be pretty nice. But now let's imagine we, for example, also want a different heading right here. So can I also change text? And that is pretty simple as well. I can, for example, just create a copy of that one as well. And now I'm again going to use voice chat, and I can instruct it to do all of the changes that I like. So currently on the first screenshot, you see my text. It's still not centered on the page, so it should be perfectly aligned to the center. Also, I don't really see why there is a fade from brown to blue on the home page header. That doesn't really make sense to me, because that color is just random and doesn't fit to the brown color scheme. The rest is pretty much alright to me. I also want you to change the title from every cup intentionally made to the best coffee in your city or something like that. And let me just press enter, and I'm again going to wait for those changes to finish. But now I also want to show you where you can essentially see your usage, because Claude AI also has usage limits. And you can see how much you used already by clicking onto this symbol right here. And right here, you now have the account and usage point. So I just press that one, and you can see right here, it also gives you a limit for 5 hours. So within 5 hours, there's a limit essentially. If you hit that limit, Claude AI will stop from working and you can't do anything else anymore until this limit resets. And right here, you also see that this limit resets in 3 hours. So even if I use this entire limit, so this gets up to 100%, this will be resetted every 5 hours. Now there's also a weekly limit. So once you reach this, you essentially have to wait for 7 days until this limit resets. So I have to wait for 6 days because 1 day already passed within this cycle. So in 6 days, this limit will reset again. Since I'm using Max, I have a pretty big limit. But this limit, if you only use the Pro version, is pretty small, and I actually used it within a couple of days. And when I use Pro, I didn't have this right here, but there's also a limit for Sonnet. That is a model. We will cover models later on, so don't worry about that for now. But just remember, there's a limit for pretty much everything. There's a 5-hour limit, so a usage limit for Claude AI for 5 hours, and a usage limit for 7 days. And once you hit this limit, you essentially have to wait until the limit resets right here. And of course, the limit is a lot higher when using Max compared to Pro. And now we are already done. So I can also show you the changes it made to our website. So let me go back to my folder. Let me open the index. And you can see now it is centered. Right here for the title, we have the best coffee in your city. And it essentially also removed the blue version right here, or the blue color right here. So it made all of the changes that I asked it to do. So by doing so, I can essentially ask Claude AI to make all of the changes that I wanted to make. And therefore, I can customize it in any way I like. And that is already a big step towards creating a really, really professional and good-looking website that fits your needs or the needs of your customer. Now that we know how to improve our websites and adjust them according to our needs, let me also show you the general folder structure of a Claude AI app. This here is the folder structure that I usually use, and that is also pretty much the folder structure that the Claude AI team recommends on their website. So especially the folders that have a description on the image are pretty much the same for most people who use Claude AI, because that is the recommended folder structure. Again, CLAUDE.md is usually within your project root directory and is the global instructions file. Then you usually have a .claude folder. And inside of this .claude folder, you have a lot of different subfolders. So agents, commands, rules, skills, and templates. And that is the folder structure that pretty much most developers use. You have agents. Agents are specialized roles, but we will get to them later on. We have commands. Commands save different workflows. We will also cover them later. Then we have rules. Those are essentially just standards, so do's and don'ts. And then we have skills. Skills are reusable procedures. We will get to skills later on as well. They are really important. And we have templates. They are reusable file structures. So if you, for example, create an automation for extracting a lot of data from the internet, and then you want Claude AI to output a PDF, then maybe this PDF should have the exact same structure every time you use this workflow. So maybe you want to do a YouTube analysis of your competitors, so of your YouTube competitors. And then you always want to have your top 3 competitors, for example, listed. You maybe want Claude AI to output their top 3 performing videos, and so on. So I think you get the idea. And maybe you run this YouTube analysis every single week. And every single week, You want Claude AI to output all of this data in a PDF file, maybe add some diagrams, so display all of this data in an appealing way. And then you can use a template. This template then essentially defines how the PDF structure should look like. So Claude AI will use that template to create a similar output every single time it uses that workflow. So that is pretty nice about templates. Not everyone uses templates, but I like to use them a lot. The things that are really important and really common, and pretty much all Claude AI developers use, are agents, rules, and skills. So those three things are pretty common across all developers. And we will get to agents and skills a lot more later on. And you already know about rules. .tmt, in case you're wondering, is a folder that I like to use. That one exists to create temporary files. So in case Claude needs something only this time, then it can put it into the TMT folder and can delete it later on. That's how I like to keep my project clean, but that's nothing that you have to do. Again, this is of course also just a recommended folder structure provided from the Claude AI team. You don't have to follow it, but I highly recommend everyone who wants to get the best output to follow that folder structure, or at least a similar one that includes the .claude folder together with agents, rules, and skills, as well as the Claude.md file, because of course the Claude.md file is pretty much a must. Now let me also show you something that is really cool about Claude AI. Currently, we only used one instance, but now something that makes Claude AI a lot more productive is that you can use multiple instances. So I can click right here, and now I could, for example, create a new session, and I can create another session, and now inside of this windows, I could, for example, say, create me a website for whatever. Right here, I could, for example, create an automation task. Right here, I could create another instance and, for example, develop an AI tool. Doesn't really matter. And right here, I could keep working on my website. So I think you get the idea. I'm not limited to one single session. I can work on multiple sessions simultaneously and therefore be super effective. And while one session is essentially thinking or working, I can just work on another session. And therefore, I genuinely think that this at the moment is the best tool to maximize your productivity. But right now, let me introduce you to different models. So if you click right here, you can see that we can also press switch models. And right here, we have a couple of different models. We have Haiku, Opus, and Default. And in order to understand them, let me first of all show you that image. As you can see right here, we have a model comparison of Haiku, Sonnet, and Opus. And Sonnet is the recommended default. So that is just the default model. The speed is balanced, intelligence is kind of strong, and cost is mid-tier. It is probably best for most tasks. Then we also have Opus. Opus is a lot slower, but its intelligence is best and the cost is the highest. This is really good for complex reasoning. So every time it's important that you get the absolute best results and no errors occur, you should always use Opus. But again, Opus is also a lot more expensive, so keep that in mind. If you're on a max plan, it's not that bad to be honest though. And then we also have Haiku. Speed is really fast, intelligence is pretty basic, and cost is the lowest. I personally use Sonnet most of the time. If I wouldn't have to care about credits, I would probably go with Opus. But again, it always depends on the situation. Now let's go back to the code editor, and now I could just switch the model right here. So I could, for example, select Haiku right here. I could also select Opus, and right here we also always have a description. So Haiku, fastest for quick answers, Opus, most capable for complex work, but it is 2 times usage versus Sonnet, and therefore you'll reach the limit twice as fast. And right here, Sonnet, and I'm going to keep using Sonnet right here. Let's now understand permission modes. And up to this point, I always used edit automatically. You might have auto mode by default, but I think I at some point changed it to edit automatically maybe. I'm not entirely sure though. Nevertheless, you can change the mode right here. And right here, you have a couple of different things. Like auto mode, so when using auto mode, Claude will automatically choose the best permission mode for each task. Then we have ask before edits, so Claude will ask for approval before making each edit. We also have edit automatically, so Claude will edit your selected text or the whole file without asking before making each edit essentially. Then we have the plan mode. That one is really important. We'll get to that one later on. And right here, Claude will explore the code and present a plan before editing. So it will essentially lay out an entire plan before making the edit. And right here, we have the bypass permission mode. That is a mode that I use a lot and a lot of developers use a lot. Right here, Claude will not ask for approval before running potentially dangerous comments. And that is something that sounds probably a little bit worse than it is. There exist cases where this here went really wrong and Claude Code, for example, deleted pretty much every file on the entire computer. But usually this almost never happens, I would say. And I only heard of probably like 1 or 2 cases where this really happened. It can potentially be dangerous if Claude, for example, interprets a command in a wrong way. But usually I would say it is pretty safe, and Claude Code usually understands pretty much everything. And every single developer I've seen up to this point uses bypass permission pretty often as well, and they're all doing pretty good. So I usually use this as well, and I never had a problem with it. And the advantage of using bypass permission is essentially just that it doesn't ask you every time to approve and so on, because that can be kind of annoying from time to time. It's likely that you don't have bypass permission right here. The reason for this is that you first have to activate it inside of Visual Studio Code. In order to see bypass permission, you have to go to File, Preferences, Settings, and right here we can now search for Claude, for example. And right here you have Claude Code, Allow Dangerously Skip Permission. And right here you have to set a checkbox. Because if I'm now going to uncheck this, you can see that this bypass permission mode is gone. I still have it selected, but if I would deselect it like so, you can see I cannot select it anymore. So now if I'm going to go to File, Preferences, Settings, enter Claude, and go to Claude Code, Allow Dangerously Skip Permissions. Now I check this, and now I should be able to select this once again. And again, oftentimes I use bypass permissions when I don't want to approve every single step. And now let's understand the difference between the plan mode and auto mode, because the plan mode is really important. When you take a look at auto mode, you write the prompt, Claude Code essentially decides on its own what it should do, and it executes immediately. When you use the plan mode, you write the prompt, Claude then tries to create a plan together with you, you approve the plan, and then Claude Code executes. And that mode is really, really beneficial because in the end, the result when using the plan mode is usually better and also more time efficient. Let me show you. So imagine this is how it works. So this is the usual way. You have your Claude.md, you prompt it, it starts to generate, you give feedback, it improves, you again give feedback. So it looks somewhat like this, for example. It again improves, you again give feedback, it improves, you give feedback. And this loop here can get pretty long if there is a lot of stuff that you have to improve. But this feedback and improvement loop can be pretty short if you have a good plan in the beginning. If you have a good plan in the beginning, it might even be possible that you never need to use this feedback improvement loop at all. So maybe you can get rid of those things right here entirely, like so, if you only add a plan right here before generating. So if you have something like this, for example, so a planning phase right before, it is possible that you never need to go to the feedback improvement loop at all because the first result is already really good. Of course, it's also possible that you have to refine or do some changes, but I would say in general, when planning, you spend much less time in this feedback improvement loop. And therefore, the overall time to finish a task usually is shorter. And I would also argue that the result in the end is better. So doing the plan for a complex project is something that I recommend all of the time. And now I want to create a more complex project with you that we create using the plan mode. So I'm going to go back to Claude AI, so right here. And this time I also want to use a reference image of a website. So Claude AI somehow understands how our website should look like. And actually I'm going to search for Chloe Ting because she actually has a pretty nice fitness website, and I now want to create a fitness website for maybe my own fitness channel, doesn't matter. And in order to do so, I want to create a screenshot of this entire website right here. So pretty much of everything she has. And in order to do so, I can right-click this page. I can now press Inspect, and now I'm going to press Ctrl-Shift-P. This will allow me to run a command, and now I can search for screenshot. And now I have a couple of different options. Capture area screenshot, capture full-size screenshot. And that is what we're looking for. We want to get a full-size screenshot. I'm going to press this right here. And this will create a full-size screenshot of this entire website. And this is what it looks like. So I can see we have this screenshot of our entire website. I'm going to right click it, copy, and now I'm just going to paste this into Claude Code. So now Claude Code already has a screenshot of this website. And now I'm going to use the plan mode for this entire project. I will also create an images folder inside of this project. Maybe I will also create a different folder inside of the outputs folder. So this is going to be fitness minus page. And inside of this fitness minus page, I also want to provide a couple of images for Claude Code that Claude Code can use to create this website. Because of course, I don't want to use Chloe Ting's images right here for the workouts, for example, but I want to use my own images instead. So I will create or provide an images folder, and later on, since Claude Code can access my entire project, it can also access the images folder and therefore use those images to create this project. I have a couple of thumbnails right here, so I'm just going to take them and drag them into my images folder like so. And now I have those pics inside of it. And now let me just try to instruct Claude Code. So I'm again going to try to record, and I'm now going to say the following as a prompt. I want you to create a full fitness workout website similar to the one attached as a screenshot, but for my image essentially, or for my images and for my workout channel. I'm running a YouTube workout channel where I'm doing follow along workouts at home. The channel name is NPC Codes. I will also provide the link to that channel in the description. I want you to go to that channel and probably take a couple of videos. You can just take a placeholder URL of some of my home workouts, and then I want you to create a homepage where you, for example, design a couple of fitness programs. Maybe you could also have a short area that, for example, says that I am selling a cookbook, for example, I don't know. And maybe also a short area that just shows a couple of my recent workouts, for example. So that is up to you. I also have a fitness minus page folder inside of the outputs folder already. I want you to use that as a project folder, and my images are all stored inside of that images folder inside of this folder. And I want you to use those images essentially as thumbnails for the workouts and for the workout programs. And when the user clicks on one of those thumbnails, he should get redirected to my YouTube page, so essentially to the individual workouts, so he can do them. I also want you to suggest a couple of things to me, so maybe a couple of things that I could add to my page. Okay, now it essentially stopped, but I can also type the rest out since it's probably just one more sentence. So I'm going to say maybe a couple of ideas that I could add to my page. Ask me anything you need to know. I am not entirely sure yet about the structure, so I am looking forward to suggestions, for example, like so. And now you can see it starts to consider. I'm currently in plan mode, and you will now see the difference to any other mode, essentially. You can see it first of all starts to explore the existing fitness minus page folder structure. It starts to write a couple of commands right here. And now you can already see the difference. Now it asks me, what is the full URL of your YouTube channel? Since I actually forgot to provide it. So I'm going to go over to my YouTube channel. Actually, it's Outwork1x, like so. In case you need a home workout, you can also go there. And then I'm going to copy this URL and I'll just paste it in here, like so. I'm going to press enter. Now it asks me how many pages should the site have at launch. Homepage only, recommended, home plus programs plus videos plus cookbooks, for example. So 4 pages. But for now, I'm going to use home plus programs. And maybe I'm going to add a recipes ad, so I can also choose other. And I'm going to say home plus programs plus videos for each program plus recipes. And now I'm going to press enter. And for the color scheme, black and electric green lime, recommended, white and bold orange red, deep navy and coral pink, pure white and purple violet. And actually I'm just going to pick what he recommended. I don't really care too much, to be honest. If it would be a real website that I would want to push online, I would probably have a couple of thoughts. But right here, I really don't care. So I'm just going to submit all of those answers. And you can see your questions have been answered. And you can see we answered the questions and it now keeps to think. And it is pretty likely that it will ask us a couple of other things in a couple of minutes. But let's take a look at that. Okay, actually he has everything that he needs, so he doesn't ask us anything else, and he starts to write a plan. And now you can see it provides a plan. So fitness website Outwork 1X, we can review it right here. So context, build a multi-page fitness website for the YouTube channel Outwork 1X. It has the URL, inspired by Chloe Ting's site. The user has 9 thumbnails images ready in output /fitness-page/images. All thumbnail clicks link to the YouTube channel. Color scheme, black background with electric lime green accent. Right here it suggests a folder structure. So it will have an HTML folder, index, programs, videos and recipes, CSS and JS. It also gives us the color codes for the designs. It will add the image assignment like so, and I think you get the idea. You can read the entire plan. I'm not going to read out everything, but I'm just going to press yes and auto accept. And right here, you could of course also keep planning and tell him what you don't like about the plan. But I'm going to auto accept because again, I don't care too much. I just want to show you how this works. And I think you get most of this at this point. And you can see it finished creating our fitness website. So I'm going to go to a Claude AI course folder, to outputs, fitness page, HTML, and now let me just open the HTML page. And you can see this is what the page looks like. So right here, I have my header essentially. I have this heading, those buttons right here. Now I have this featured program section. Actually, I think this looks really, really nice already. Then we have recent workouts. If I'm going to press on this button, you can see it opens my page. And now at the moment, it just redirected to this page. If I wanted to redirect to the videos, I would have to change that. And probably I would have to give the individual links to Claude AI. But that would be something that would be pretty much doable if I would spend a little more time. You can also press view all videos. And now we get to the view all videos section. Let me go back to home and let's keep scrolling. Right here, we also have the Outwork recipe collection. We have this section, whatever that is. And actually, I think this is a really, really nice website already. We can also go over to programs and right here, it also looks pretty nice in my opinion. Let's take a look at one of those programs. Let's start a program and we get redirected to that page. So on a real website, I would probably redirect to a videos page, but again, I could adjust that later on. Also, I think the spacing isn't perfect here, but I think you also understand how you could adjust it using a normal text prompt or voice prompt later on. Then let's go to videos. This here looks really nice in my opinion. And we can also go to recipes. And right here we have a couple of recipes. Let me take a look. And of course, would also be cool if this would redirect the user to a different page. But again, I think you understand the idea. By using the plan mode, we were able to create this and we had a lot more control. Anything that Claude needed has been asked before we even started to create it. And I wasn't really precise as well, I have to say. I could have said, for example, that I want to have individual recipe pages once the user clicks on the page. I also could have said that I want for every single program an individual videos page and so on. So I think you understand the power of the plan mode. And every time you want to create a big project and you want Claude AI to create a great result when first trying, I highly recommend you to use the plan mode. So the plan mode is always my recommended choice when you have difficult tasks such as creating a full website. Also, if you take a look at the entire history, right here we have update, we have write, update. Then we also have things like, let's scroll upwards. We have PowerShell, we have glob right here, agent. We also have edit right here from time to time and read and grab. So what does all of this mean? And actually, it's not super important for you to know what exactly it means because it does it anyways. And yeah, you don't really have to worry about it. But I want to explain this very short to you anyways, so you at least have an idea about it. So right here, you see a couple of the core tools grouped by what they do. So we have tools that inspect. For example, read opens and reads a file. Glob finds files by a pattern. Grab searches file content. Then we have a modify section. So write creates a new file. Edit edits a file. Execute, for example, something like bash, runs a shell command, so npm, git, and so on. And delegate, for example, the agent, spawns a sub-agent for a subtask. And we'll get to sub-agents later on, but for now it's not that important. But just remember that whenever you see something like write, edit, read, it is essentially just our agent using a certain tool to do a certain task. And those are essentially the core built-in tools. So you don't get confused when you see something like read, write, and so on. But again, you don't really have to memorize this. It will happen under the hood anyways. Let's now understand skills. And if you remember, if we go to our .claude folder right here, we also have the skills folder. And we already have one skill for web development. Why do we have a skill? Because in my Claude.md, I say, whenever needed, create a skill for a certain task. So right here, I defined that I want Claude to automatically generate skills when they make sense and will be reused in the future. And of course, we are doing a lot of web development. Therefore, Claude AI generated a skill for web development right here. So what is the skill essentially? A skill is pretty similar to our Claude.md. So it's also a markdown file, as you can see. But the difference is that a Claude.md just defines how Claude should work on a general project level, essentially, whereas a skill defines how Claude.md should work for a specific task. As you can see, a rule is also a markdown file. A skill is a markdown file. Claude.md is a markdown file. So in the end, Claude AI is pretty much just using a lot of instructions in form of markdown files and then making the agent use those instructions whenever they are necessary. So all of those markdown files are instructions. And the general markdown file, so the general Claude.md file, tells our agent how those instructions should be loaded. Then the agent reads this general markdown file and takes a look at the required markdown files and uses those required markdown files whenever necessary. So in the general markdown file, we, for example, say, use a skill for certain tasks, for example, like developing a website. Take a look at the rules before doing something to understand what you should probably not do. So all of this stuff is defined in a general Claude.md file. So the agent understands where it has to look. Then the agent, when, for example, creating a website, takes a look at the Claude.md file. It knows that for generating a website, there might exist a skill. Therefore, it looks at the skills folder. It sees that there is a skill inside of the web development folder. So it takes a look at that skill. That skill has a description. It takes a look at this description. It is a reusable workflow for building a complete static website from a brief, covers planning, file setup, and implementation stacks. When to use, anytime a new static website or standalone HTML page needs to be built from a user brief. In my Claude.md, I say that my agent should take a look at the skills folder, read the description, and when the description fits the current task, execute the certain skill. So execute the web development skill. Now I could also have another skill right here. So let me just create another folder for maybe AI automation. Now I want to create a website. It might also take a look at the skill.md file instead of the AI automation folder. This might now give instructions for maybe automating a certain task. Doesn't matter. Obviously, AI automation doesn't really fit to web development. So now I maybe have a description right here as well. But this one, for example, says automate AI tasks and whatever. I don't care. You get the idea. Now, right here, I would have an AI description and AI development. Of course, Claude, so the agent now takes a look at the description right here and when to use. But we're developing a website, so this it doesn't really make sense. So it goes on to the next skill. So it doesn't use the skill. It takes a look at web development, at the skill.md, takes a look at the description and the when to use section. And right here, this actually fits web development. So it might use the instructions from this skill. And this skill now introduces our agent on how to work and behave when doing web development. So let me delete this right here. We don't really need this, like so. And now we can take a look at the instructions. So we see we have required inputs, project name, site type, sections or feature requested, and any color, font, or style preferences. We have a workflow defined, so how should the agent behave? Confirm output path, check this folder, apply rules from the rules folder, so .claude/rules/web.md, so the rules should be applied as well. Then he creates files in this order, CSS/base CSS, and so on. So I think you get the idea. Right here we have the entire workflow. We also have tools defined. We also have an output format defined right here, and so on. And actually, you could argue that the output structure is kind of repetitive because we also have it inside of the rules folder. I would say that it more or less probably belongs to the skills folder, so I could also probably remove it from the rules folder, but I think you get the idea. So a rule is just a general standard. For example, something like use lowercase. It essentially defines a rule. And a skill is a set of instruction that allows you to perform a certain skill, in this case, the skill of web development. You could also create a file for a skill of front-end development. So you could also separate front-end and back-end development. And then you have a skill for front-end development and back-end development. You could also have a skill to generate artificial intelligence. And inside of those skills, you always define the workflow. So how should the AI work essentially? So a skill essentially defines everything that is necessary to perform a certain task as well as possible. So rules, general do's and don'ts, and a skill, a precise instruction on how to get to the best result possible for a certain task. And now, of course, I could also ask Claude AI to create a specific skill. Please create a skill for front-end development and use my current skill of web development as orientation, for example, and also create a skill for back-end development. I usually use Supabase and more instructions will follow later on. I'm going to send this right here. And now it should actually separate our web development skill into front-end and back-end development. And of course, this is just an example. You can do pretty much anything you like, but that is up to you. Also, Supabase, I'm not really using it that often, but we will use it later on. Therefore, it might make sense to already create the skill right now. And you can see it asks me whether he can write into that folder. Of course he can. Let's take a look at the skills folder. You can see we have front-end development, so we have a skill.md inside of this file. We have web development, so we have a skill.md in that file. And backend Supabase, so we also have a skill.md in that file. And you can see right here, it essentially defines how to behave or how to proceed when we are trying to create a backend using Supabase. You can have as many skills as you like. And for me, a skill usually always has a folder as well as a skill.md file that instructs how to execute this skill. And especially the workflow is important for a skill because that defines essentially how the skill should be executed step by step. And by using the step-by-step procedure, we usually get the best result possible. Of course, skills should always be updated and improved over time because it's very unlikely that a skill is perfect when trying it for the first time. Usually you will try that skill and use that skill, then you will see that something doesn't work the way you want it to work. So you tell Claude AI to update the skill and make it better over time essentially. So that is also an improvement loop that you will have for skills. And now I want to use the skill, but in order for you to see that this works, I'm going to change the skill slightly. So now I'm going to say for the front-end development, please create a skill for front-end development using React, where we use React.js for the front end, like so. So I want to create a new skill for front-end development, but this time I want to use React. And for those of you who don't know React, React.js is essentially just a JavaScript framework to build your entire front end only using basically JavaScript, if you want to think about it like that. Again, if you don't know React, it's not that bad. It's just a different technology. So in the end, it will all be compiled to HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. But technically, we are not really using it when writing the code. And you will see the difference in a second. So now I'm just accepting this right here. You can see we created front-end minus React as a skill, like so. I think it's already also done. And now I'm going to say, use the skill front-end minus React. Actually, I don't even have to say it. I just say, create a React front-end website for a photographer, like so. I'm going to press enter. And let's take a look. I actually hope that I even have everything installed on this PC, because this is a new PC and you need a couple of tools, so probably Node.js on your PC to create a React website. But I think it should work, and I think I have all of the stuff. So you can see it now takes a lot of stuff, and usually it will automatically check whether there exists a skill that fits. In our case, the skill.md inside of the front and React folder should work, because when to use right here defines that anytime the project uses React as the front-end framework, we want to use it. So therefore, it should check this and should realize we are using React in this project, so I want to use the skill, and then it should use this workflow right here. So installing npm, getting this folder structure, and so on. So I think you get the idea. And let's take a look at the output once it's done to check whether this in fact worked or not. And actually it just finished to create everything, and it saved it to outputs photographer minus portfolio. So we will look at outputs, photographer, portfolio, and actually you don't have to understand this, but I'm going to open it in the terminal. And now I'm just going to enter npm run dev right here. This will start my development server. I'm going to allow it the Node.js access, and I'm going to open this on a website, and this is what it looks like. So now we have a photographer website using React.js right here. So this is a React website. We also have the portfolio, about, contact, so we can skip through all of the individual sections like so. And I think this looks really nice, to be honest. So now I just used a different technology. So I didn't use HTML anymore, but instead I used the framework React.js. So I have one skill for front-end development using HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, and I have another skill for front-end development using React, for example. And you can just add as many skills as you like right here, and all of those skills could essentially define how to act when a certain task occurs. Then the agent, so Claude AI, will automatically select the required skill whenever necessary. So I think you get the idea. Let me now introduce you to agents. So our agent is essentially always executing the instructions and using the tools to execute the instructions. So the agent, first of all, takes a look at the CLAUDE.md, then takes a look at the prompt, and then probably decides that he needs a skill to execute a certain prompt. So he takes a look at the skills folder, selects the required skill, and uses that skill to execute whatever we want to do using the necessary tools. So that is the agent. So now let's understand them a little bit better by taking a look at agents versus skills. So skills are role agnostic, whereas an agent has a role. A skill defines how to do something. So how to code a website, for example. An agent defines the who. And you will understand this in a sec. A skill is a reusable procedure, whereas an agent has a model and tool preferences. The skill lives in Claude skills, whereas an agent uses skills to execute the necessary code. An example for a skill is web development or creating a course structure, whereas an example for an agent is a front-end developer and a code reviewer. So this is also a pretty good example already. If you think about agents, you could also create multiple agents. You could create one agent that essentially takes the role of a front-end developer. Then you could create another agent that takes the role of a code reviewer. And then you could also create an agent for testing, so testing your code. So essentially, they're all doing web development. So they're all using the skill web development, for example, but they have different perspectives on web development. And it's similar to a football player. If you think about a football player, you have a striker, and you, for example, have a defense player. And they're all playing football. But in the end, a defense player has a completely different perspective on football than a striker. A striker has the goal to score goals, whereas a defense player wants to avoid goals. So again, they are both playing football, but they are looking at the same task from a different perspective. And it might make sense to have multiple agents in the agents folder, for example, for different tasks. So I could have one agent for front-end development. Right here, you can see that this is also defined as a markdown file again. So all of this is always defined as a markdown file. In the end, Claude AI consists of markdown files and an agent that uses those markdown files as instructions on how to behave and all of the stuff. So literally everything in Claude AI is defined as a markdown file. This agent's skills, rules, command structure is just a structure that is kind of beneficial and seems to work. Therefore, we use it. but it's not really something that you have to do. It's just something that works pretty good in practice. So that is important to understand. Everything in the end is just a markdown file, and how we use those markdown files is up to us. But we use this agents, skills, rules, and commands structure. So right here for the front-end developer, we have a name, so a name definition. The name is front-end developer. The description is used when building or updating any static or client-side web project, HTML pages, CSS styling, JS interaction, or modify site structure. The model is also defined for an agent, so Claude Sonnet 4.6. Tools are read, write, edit, glob, and grab, for example. And skills are defined as well right here. So skills that he might want to use is web development. We could also add front-end development right here, which would make sense because we now have the skill right here. But I think you get the idea. But now let me also ask Claude AI to create a code reviewer. Can you create a code reviewer agent for me that reviews my code and gives me feedback on how a certain website is, for example? I will ask him to do that, and now he's thinking again. And you can see it now created this model for me, what it checks: HTML structure, semantics, CSS quality, JavaScript, accessibility, performance, like lazy loading, render blocking scripts, font swap, and so on. So I'm going to ask him, can you take a look? Let's take a look at our outputs folder. And now I'm going to take a look at my coffee shop. So let's take a look at the coffee shop website. At my coffee shop website as a reviewer, for example, like so. And now he will use the agent reviewer. So it has created a new agent. Let's take a look at the agents folder. We now have code reviewer, name code reviewer, used when you need a thorough review of a website project, HTML structure, CSS quality, JavaScript correctness, accessibility, performance, and overall design feedback. Delegate this agent after building or updating any front-end project. Model Claude Opus 4.8. So actually we use Claude Opus right here. So we use the best model. Whereas for the front-end developer, we use Claude Sonnet. So the code reviewer uses a better model. And Claude AI just decided that Claude Opus might be the better fit right here and use that model for our code reviewer. So you can see that we can also define different models for different tasks. And that is really important because if you think about, for example, tasks that are pretty simple, like, for example, gathering research from the internet, then it would be really a waste of tokens to use Claude Opus for that task. So I could, for example, create a researcher that uses Haiku as a model, and then that researcher will be used to gather information. And later on, you can, for example, use a different model to use that information that, for example, the researcher gathered and do something else with that information that probably requires a little bit more reasoning. So I think you understand the idea. You use different models, so different agents that use different models for different tasks, and therefore you can use Claude AI for longer, and it is also optimized for different tasks, and the results will be better. And that is really important to understand. And now let's take a look. We have an overall score of 7 out of 10. So right here, you can see the feedback, HTML structure, CSS quality, JavaScript, accessibility. So now we could, for example, use this result to improve the quality of our MD files by telling him that he should update our MD files, so maybe our web MD files, to create better and cleaner code. So that is something that we could do. So I'm going to say, use that feedback to update all of the rules, skills, and agents necessary to get a better result for the next website in terms of performance or in terms of everything. So HTML structure, CSS quality, JavaScript, accessibility, and so on. So I think you get the idea. So we now use the feedback that the reviewer gave us to improve the quality of this overall score the next time we create a website. So this will now adjust our MD files, so our instructions, and next time we will hopefully get a better result. And that is the power of agents. You can take a look at a certain result or task from different perspectives, and that is important. So you can see He says, I have everything, now applying all review findings as improvements across 4 files simultaneously. WebMD gets the most changes since it's the source of truth for all rules. So most changes will be found inside of this file right here, so our WebMD file. So we will take a look at that file in a second. Let's press yes right here and yes. And right here, it would probably make sense to just bypass their permissions because asking me for every single update is kind of unnecessary at this point, in my opinion. And you can see everything has been updated. Let's take a look at our WebMD and you can see, as much as I see, the WebMD is a little bit longer right now. I'm also not going to read through it. I think you understand how this works at this point. Let's now go over to Claude AI again and let me introduce you to commands. You can use a command by using a slash followed by the command. So for example, slash init right here. So I see this here is a slash command. And this right here would initialize a CLAUDE.md file from what Claude AI essentially knows about your folder structure. So if you don't have a CLAUDE.md file in your project yet, you can use slash init and Claude AI will try to detect what you have inside of your project and do its best to create a CLAUDE.md file for you. Usually, instead of using the slash init command, I would recommend you to essentially just describe what your CLAUDE.md file should look like. And I think Claude AI will then do a much better job because then it has a lot more information than just using slash init and letting it do its job on its own. But again, that's up to you. Now, another slash command is slash clear, for example. And right here, you can also see the info text. So start a new session with empty context. Previous session stays on disk. So this here essentially clears this chat. So you can also use slash clear whenever you like. I'm not going to do that because I don't need that right now. But now I want to talk about a pretty important concept. And we can understand that concept while understanding commands at the same time. So we can use a slash command once again. And now let's do slash context, like so. And right now, this will load the context usage. So right here, you can see the amount of tokens. And at the moment, we used 202,000 tokens out of 200,000 tokens. So we essentially already used 101% of the context. And that's actually a little bit too much. So what exactly is the context? The context is essentially everything that Claude has inside of his head, if you want to think about it like that. So essentially inside of his memory. And that memory, of course, has a limit. So usually you should not get over that limit. And right here, you can also see the amount of tokens. So in total, the context has 200,000 tokens. And right here, we can also see how many tokens each category uses. So system prompts at the moment used 6.6k tokens, system tools 16k tokens, custom agents 94, memory files 3k, skills 1k, and you can see our chat messages use 180,000 tokens right here. So we use this chat a lot right here. So we use a lot of tokens for this chat right here. So this entire chat is inside of the memory of Claude AI essentially. And now we could, for example, use slash clear to clear this chat history. And now I'm going to use slash context once again. And you can see we essentially also cleared our context because there don't really exist any messages anymore. So we have a lot of free space right here. So something that is important to know is that also every single session right here pretty much has its own context. So if I'm going to go right here and we have this chat right here, let me just enter slash context. You can see right here, we have those 202,000 tokens right here because it will also store our old context inside of this session. But by using slash clear, we clear this session and create a new session. So a new clear session. And that is this session right now. So this context right here is almost empty because we didn't really waste a lot of tokens on messages. So on keeping the messages inside of the context, so inside of the brain essentially of Claude AI. Whereas this session right here uses pretty much all of the context for keeping messages inside of the brain. So isn't there another way to also keep essentially most of the information inside of Claude AI's brain, so Claude AI's context, without using clear and essentially using the entire message context? And in order to do so, we can again use a slash command, and now we're going to use slash compact right here. And you can see it now starts to compact this session right here. And maybe let me also rename this. This here is context uncleared, and this here is context cleared, for example, because this here is the context that we previously cleared, and this is the one that we didn't clear up to this point. So this here is the context that stores all of our messages inside of its memory, and therefore this context is pretty much full. So now we're still waiting for compacting, and I can already explain to you what compacting does. So what /compact does. It essentially tries to keep all of the important information in the context, so inside of Claude AI's brain essentially, but tries to minimize them. Because right here, we have a lot of text, and essentially keeping every single word in the memory takes a lot of context, so a lot of tokens. But it's not really necessary to keep all of those tokens, so all of those words in the memory. You could essentially store pretty much most of the information by using a couple of sentences to describe the main points. And that is essentially what is happening right here when we are compacting. Claude AI takes a look at the current information and tries to memorize as efficiently as possible. You can see it compacted the chat and 203k tokens have been freed. So now I can again take a look at the context, and you can see now our messages only take up 13.8k tokens, so it's now a lot less, and we still have most of the information. Of course, it's important to know that you will lose some information, because it's never possible to get rid of a lot of tokens without losing information, of course. But it tries to keep the important information inside of its memory without losing anything that matters. Of course, sometimes it can happen that you lose something that matters, but that is essentially a risk you have to take if you want to keep your context clean. And it's also important to know that the context, so the messages context, for example, is different for every new session. So if I would now create a new session, for example, and I would use /context, for example, you will see that the context usage right here is of course completely different from the context usage inside of our check weather conditions session. Or this here is also check weather conditions, but this is the cleared version. So here the context is also completely different. So if I'm going to use /context, you can see that this is how this works. So right here, we have 110 tokens for messages. And right here, if I'm going to use /context, we have almost 14k tokens for messages. So I think you get the idea. Every session has a different context. You can also use /clear to duplicate a session essentially, but clear pretty much most of the context for that session. Or you could also create a completely new session that essentially starts with a fresh context. But if you take a look at the context inside of a new session, so let's use /context for example, you can see that right here, a couple of things will still be there. So system prompts are always there. There's not really much you can do about it. System tools are of course also always there because of course Claude AI by default has a couple of tools that it uses to process your requests. So they are there by default as well. Then we have some custom agents, memory files essentially. So Claude AI also has a memory, skills, so they are inside of our project folder. You can of course also keep them shorter, but most of the time messages is really the point that is important because right here you can really make your context usage more efficient. So now you already understand a little bit about commands, so /commands like /context for example, or /compact or /init. Essentially, /commands are just instructions for Claude AI that will trigger a certain workflow. So /init, for example, triggers creating a CLAUDE.md file. /compact will trigger compacting your entire chat history, and so on. And I would say that those are the most important default commands. But now you can also create custom commands. So now I could, for example, say that I want to have a custom command that I can use that automatically creates a random website, for example. Create a custom command for me that will automatically generate a full HTML, CSS, and JavaScript website, random idea from you, and random design. So I can use it as inspiration for web projects, for example. And now I say this command should have the following structure: /generate cool web design, for example. And now I'm going to press enter, for example, and you can see it starts to work. Let's take a look at the Explorer. And right here, you also see that we have this commands folder right here. So we also have a command for build-website, but now it will also add another commands. And this here has been added because in my CLAUDE.md, I also define that I probably want to have a couple of commands from time to time if they make sense. So Claude AI probably generated that one by default. So right here inside of my CLAUDE.md, I define for commands auto-created by Claude when a recurring workflow pattern emerges. Each file is equal to one / command with goal, workflow, expected output, no implementation scripts inside. So right here, I define that whenever there is a recurring task, like creating websites, for example, Claude AI should automatically create a command for that. But now I can also ask Claude whether it can create a custom command. So I can, again, just press yes right here. And now I will wait for that. And right here, it will now, or it already created, a generate cool web design command. And now I can use /generate -cool -web design, but it doesn't show that command. And the reason for this is that you usually have to restart Visual Studio Code in order to see new commands. So I'm going to restart. I restarted Visual Studio Code, and now I should be able to see that command. So I'm going to use generate cool web design. Now you can see that it is a / command. And now you can see once I hit the enter button or click the command, it starts to think, and it will now start to generate a cool web design according to my description in the generate cool web design MD. And again, it's an MD, so it's a markdown file. So essentially it's just an instruction. So commands are also instructions. Instructions that define what kind of workflow should be called when the user enters this command. So in the end, this here just instructs our agent to follow a certain pattern, so to follow a certain workflow. So in the end, again, commands, rules, agents, and skills, everything is in the end just a markdown file that describes to CLAUDE.md how it should behave. So right here, we have the instructions. So description generates a complete, visually striking HTML, CSS, JS website from a randomly chosen concept. Use this for design inspiration. Goal, invent a random website concept and build it end to end. Layout, color palette, typography, interactions, and content. The result should look like a real product someone could ship, not a placeholder demo. So that was pretty much the exact stuff that I prompted to CLAUDE.md, and now it created this command right here. So this instruction file that I can access by using a command, by using a custom / command. And that's really powerful because now you can essentially turn every single workflow into a command that you can access by using probably 1 word, 2 words, 3 words, however you like. You could also do it in a different way. So you could also say, use the generate cool web design command and generate a website for whatever. So you could just have a description right here. So you could also access this command like this, and that is up to you. A / command is just a little bit shorter, but if you want to describe something, you can also just access those commands by telling it Claude AI. So you can always talk to Claude AI, and that is really important because a lot of people think that it's really static, and once you have this commands folder, you have to use the exact same / commands to access this workflow. But that's not how it works. You can just tell Claude AI to do something, and he knows the folder structure. And Claude AI is also pretty intelligent if you want to call it like that. So if you just say, I want to have this or that workflow, but maybe I want to change the color scheme, or I want you to do a website for fitness, for example, it can adjust that workflow according to your needs. And that is really powerful. So you still have somehow the basic concept, but for every single project, you can adjust it according to your needs. And now you can see it created that project. The output is kern and co. So right here, this page. So let's go inside of our folder to outputs, kern and co, HTML, and let's just press the index page right here. And you can see this here is the inspiration that it gave us. And I think this here is really a pretty cool website already. If we are going to scroll down, you can see that we get all of this stuff. So a couple of fonts. We also have those cool fly-in effects or pop-up effects, however you want to call them. Then we can go to fonts right here, the exact same. We also have this cool hover effect. We can switch between different fonts like so. We can also scroll down, and this looks kind of nice as well. And the exact same for about. So I can see this here looks pretty modern as well. We also have this contact form. And I think you can already see this page here looks really, really modern and would be a great inspiration for web design, for example. And now I could, of course, also make your prompt a little more specific. So I could, for example, say, I want a fitness website. I want a yellow teal color design, for example. So for the color scheme. For the font, I maybe want to use this or that. So I think you get the idea. You can talk to Claude and it can pretty much do anything you like. Let's now also take a look at prompting effectively. You can talk to Claude, but it's really important that your prompts are effective. And it's really important that your prompts are precise. So instead of writing something or saying something like, create a good and beautiful website, you should use clear instructions. So I should, for example, say something like, create a fitness website. Use as a color scheme yellow and orange. Primary color should be orange. Secondary color should be teal. For the heading, use the text, and then you can specify the text, for example. So keep your instructions short and clear. There's no need in using full words. There's no need in writing unnecessary stuff like make it look good. What is good? That is not an instruction that will help Claude AI to generate something better, because it doesn't really help. It doesn't really add anything. So I hope you understand that writing your prompts is important. And oftentimes it can also make sense to ask an AI, even Claude AI, to write the prompt for you or ask it how it would structure that prompt to get the best result. Oftentimes I also ask ChatGPT, for example, so I tell him about my idea and I tell him to structure this and make it as precise and clear as possible. So that is something that you can also do. Again, it's up to you, but it's important that you remember that your prompts need to be precise, clear, and explain everything as detailed as possible. So give as much information as possible. Because only if you do so only if your prompts are good, the result will be good. Let's now understand lost in the middle. And that is a problem when you work with Claude AI. And it describes how attention is distributed across context. So you usually have a start of context. So for example, start to write your first message. And right here, Claude pays full attention. Then you get to the middle of the context, and this one is often deprioritized. Then you get to the end of the context, and right here, Claude pays full attention again. So when you write a prompt, it's important to put important instructions at the start or end, but not in the middle. So when writing a long prompt, it's important to understand that in the beginning, right here, the awareness is going to be high. So we will have a lot of awareness, then it's going to go down as the prompt gets longer, and then once we get to the end, the awareness is again going to go up, and it's going to be really high in the end. So whatever we have in the middle will somehow be lost. And that's why you call that problem lost in the middle. So whenever you have important information when writing a prompt, information should either be in the beginning or in the end. The stuff that you have in the middle will of course also be considered, but it will have less importance for Claude AI. So when writing extremely long prompts, this here is a pretty important concept. And now let's also take a look at iterating on the UI. We've already looked at this, but I really want to make sure that every single one of you understands this. And iterating on the UI is a simple feedback loop for visual fixes. So usually, whenever you want to fix something, so when you want to improve the quality of your product, you describe what looks wrong. And in order to do so, you use either text or screenshots. So the way we did up to this point. Then Claude applies the fix. So I did CSS, for example, the layout, the structure, and then you preview it and repeat until it looks right. So it's important that, again, the description is as detailed as possible, but I would also highly recommend you to use screenshots for that purpose, because by giving Claude AI visual feedback, the result in the end will be a lot better. And by describing this visual feedback at the same time using a prompt, you will probably get the best result. So combining screenshots and text is really important when you want to get the best result possible, so therefore the best feedback loop. Up to this point, we only looked at web development in a pretty simple form. So we only used HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So all of that stuff was inside of our project. But now it's also possible to connect Claude AI to services. So to online services, for example, like GitHub, Gmail, Figma, Supabase, and so on. And in order to do so, we use something that is called MCP. And Claude connects to external services through MCP. So MCP is essentially a translator between, for example, an external service like Gmail and Claude Code. So by using MCP, Claude Code can access external programs like Gmail, gather information from those programs, for example, or write emails, or do pretty much anything you like. And that is really important, and that is probably the most powerful tool for Claude AI. Because by using MCP, you can integrate external services into your program and add their functionality, for example. So it could give Claude Code access to your Gmail account. Claude Code could, for example, read your emails, could, for example, summarize those emails, and could then, for example, reply to your emails. It could also connect to GitHub, for example, and upload your projects to GitHub, for example, once a week if you want to do so. You can also connect Claude Code to a database, for example. It can therefore edit the database and write into the database, so all of that stuff. Or you could also connect it to Figma, for example, and it could design there. And in my opinion, through MCP, Claude Code becomes probably the most powerful tool that you can currently use in the entire internet, in my opinion, because you can use Claude Code to literally automate almost every single online task that exists. So whether that is, for example, fetching data from your Gmail account, fetching data online, summarizing your YouTube data, generating designs, generating databases, and so on. So I think you get the idea. And therefore, I really want you to understand MCP, and we're going to use MCP to create a full stack web application. So a web application that allows us to, for example, generate users, so the user can register on our website. The user will then be stored in a database, and later on, the user can therefore log in using his register credentials. And he can, for example, also write comments, and he can maybe also use a chat later on to write with other users, and so on. So we will now build a full stack web application using Supabase. And if you want to follow along, then we're going to go over to Google. Right here, we are going to search for Supabase, and we are now going to start to connect to Supabase. In order to do so, I will use a new session. So I'm going to create a new session. And first of all, in order to get the best result, I'm going to use plan mode again. So we're going to go to plan mode. And in this project, I want us to use every single tool essentially that we have learned up to this point. So we're going to start by using the plan mode, and we will ask Claude AI what it would recommend us to do if we want to create a full stack web application using Supabase, for example. And now I'm going to ask, or I'm going to say, I want to create a full stack web application using technologies like HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And for the backend, I want you to use Supabase. I will give you an API key, but I just want you to have a placeholder in my .env file where I can later on enter my API key. If I need anything else besides the API key and its sensitive information, then add it to my .env file as well, and I will add it later on. I want you to create a basic chat application where users can register and log in, and later on they can add friends, for example, by using their email addresses, for example, and then add them, and once they added them as a friend, they will be able to chat with each other. If I need anything else, feel free to let me know. So that is my instruction. I'm now going to send it, and Claude AI will start to work. And it will let us know if it needs anything else from us. And now it already created a plan without asking me anything, apparently, and we can read through the plan. So chat application, full stack plan. Build a real-time chat web application using vanilla HTML, CSS, JS plus Supabase. Users can register, log in, send friend requests by email, accept or reject them, and chat in real time with accepted friends via Supabase real time. No build step, Supabase is loaded via CDN UMD bundle. Output location, outputs / chat app, that's fine. App name, convo, doesn't really matter to me, to be honest. Right here, we have all of those files right here. Environment variables, add to the root.env file, placeholders only. User fills in values, Supabase URL and Supabase and key. JS config.js is the runtime source for the browser. The adding key is public and safe client side. Supabase schema, right here we have the tables. So it uses an ID, email, display name, and created at. Friendships look like this. So right here it just has the tables. You don't even need to understand this, to be honest, even though it's not really that hard, but yeah, you get the idea. Right here we have triggers, so handle new user and so on. So it essentially just describes what it wants to do. And let's not read through all of this. Let's just go ahead and auto accept the plan so it can start to work. And now we can already go to Supabase. I can tell you that we have to go to Supabase right here, press the first link, and now you can essentially create an account or sign in. That's up to you. If you don't have an account, you just create one, otherwise you sign in. So I'm going to press sign in. Right here you could sign up if you don't have an account yet. I'm going to use GitHub, so my GitHub page essentially. So now it will log us in. And right here for you it's possible that you have to add a new organization, so I can just proceed with all of those steps. I already have one, so I'm just going to click on that one. It doesn't really matter though. And now we're going to create a new project right here. I'm just going to use a random name. I think Convo was the name that has been suggested, and a database password. I'm just going to generate a random password. I don't even care too much. I'm going to copy that one in case we need it later on, and I'm going to press create project. So now it created our Supabase backend essentially. And now it told us that we essentially need to get an API key and I think the app password. So let's go to our projects right here, to outputs. Right here we have chat app. And inside of the .env file, the global.env file, it added our keys right here. So OpenAI API key, Supabase URL, and Supabase adding key should be necessary. I don't know why it added those two keys. I don't need them for this project, but maybe it thought that I might want to use them for another one. But okay, for now, it told us that we need Supabase URL and Supabase adding key. So let's take a look at whether we can find the adding key using Supabase. I actually didn't use Supabase myself. Up to this point, I only use Firebase, and usually I code the backends myself. But now I think it's pretty good that I don't know anything about this, because now you can see how easy it is to set something like this up. So right here, we have this URL right here. So I'm just going to copy that one. This here seems to be the project URL. And you can see we have all of those keys. So project URL, publishable key, direct connection string, and CLI setup command. So I'm just going to do a screenshot of this right here. And I'm going to paste it into my chat right here. And I'm already, while it's working, preparing everything. And I will ask, what keys should I enter in the .env file? Which kind of keys do you need? Like so. Let's go back. And I think we also need an API key. So I'm going to go to project settings because most of the times it's over there. And right here you can see that we have data API. So API might make sense, but we also have API keys. So probably it's right here under API keys. And we have the secret key section, and we also have this default section. And I think it needed the publishable key as much as I read, but I'm not entirely sure. So again, I'm just going to copy this right here. And I will also ask it whether do I need the publishable key or the, what was the second one? Secret key, like so. And now I'm just going to wait for this to finish. And once finished, I will send it this message and hopefully it can help me. And maybe I can also ask, or is something still missing? Like so. And you can see everything is finished. So I'm going to read this. Before you can run it, create a Supabase project at supabase.com. Free tier is fine. Copy your credentials from project settings, API, the project URL, and nm public key. Paste them into js.config.js. So I'm going to ask, do I need to copy to the .env file or to js.config.js? So js/config.js, like this. Run the SQL, paste the contents of Supabase /migrations/001 init SQL into the Supabase SQL editor and click run. Enable real-time. In the Supabase dashboard, go to database, replication, and toggle on friendships and messages. So I'm going to press this right here. And now we can already start to run the SQL. So we need to go to this file right here. Let's just copy all of this. And now it told us to paste all of this into the Supabase SQL editor. So let's go to the Supabase SQL editor. So right here should be the SQL editor. I'm going to paste this in. Now I'm just going to press run. Potential issue detected. This query includes destructive operations. It may permanently change or remove data, tables, schema, or other objects. And I think it doesn't really matter because we don't really have anything that we could destroy. So I'm going to run this query. And there seems to be a mistake. So I'm going to just copy this entire window right here. And I'll paste it over to Claude AI. And I'm going to ask, why does this error occur when I paste into the SQL editor like so? And now let's also take a look at the result. You need the publishable key, not the security key. Here's the breakdown. So let's go back. Let's take a look at the API keys. So under project settings, we also have API keys, and I need the publishable key. So this one right here. Let's go back. Where to enter it? So this secret key, server side only, never put this into client code. So I need to have the publishable key. Say for browsers, use this. Where to enter it? js/config.js is the file that actually matters. The .env is just a documentation placeholder in this project. So I'm going to go over to js/config.js right here. And I will just paste it in under window Supabase NN key, like so. And now I also need to add window Supabase URL. So I'm going to go back. Let's take a look what is that about that. Summary of what you need to do. The project URL is partially visible in your first screenshot. So https agfub. So I have to get that one. So let's go back. Let's go to general because I think we found it right here. Or actually it was under project overview. And right here, this should be the URL. So the project URL. So I'm going to copy that one as well. And I will just paste that one into the config.js file as well. So right here, I'm going to save that one. And now summary of what you need to do. Paste the project URL into window.supabase URL. We did that. Paste the publishable key. We did that as well. Optionally, copy both into .env. We don't have to do that. Then run the SQL migration and enable real-time as described earlier. And where do I enable real-time? So let's ask this because we already finished with step 1 and 2. So let's get to 3 and 4, like so. And now it starts to fix this error. So the error is a Postgres SQL limitation. Unique constraints inside create table don't accept function calls like least and greatest. So it will now start to fix this and copy the updated Supabase migration 001 init SQL and paste the whole thing fresh into the SQL editor. Then run it again. So let's do this. I'm going to copy this, paste it into the SQL editor right here. And now I'm going to run this again. Run query. Fail to run SQL. So we have a syntax error once again. So I'm just going to copy this here once again into Supabase like so. And now I'm into Claude. So right here, I'm going to say still an error like so. And while waiting for that, where to enable real-time, click database in the left sidebar, click replication. Under Supabase real-time, find the friendship and messages row and toggle them on. So I think we have to do that after we added our 001 init SQL. And now it already fixed the error. So let's go there. Let me copy this. Let me paste this right here. Let's run this again. Run query. And it's running. We have to wait for this. Success. No rows returned. So now this should work. Let's go back. And what do we have to do afterwards? We have to click database in the left sidebar and then click replication. So let's take a look. Database. And right here, we should now have replication somewhere right here. And now what do we have to do afterwards? After Supabase real-time, find the friendship and messages row and toggle them on. So let me copy this here once again. and let me ask, where is Supabase real-time and friendships and messages? Like this. Click on Supabase real-time. That's the wrong replication page. That's for external data pipeline. Supabase real-time is configured under publications, which is right in there in your sidebar. So I have to go to publications essentially. So right here. And now we have Supabase real-time, as he said. So click on Supabase real-time. Now, actually, I cannot click that right here. So he says, or he suggests an alternative. He says, if that doesn't work either, the easiest alternative is to just run these two lines directly in the SQL editor. No need to use the UI at all. I actually don't really want to use the UI therefore, so I'm just going to do it like this. Now let me go back to the SQL editor and let me replace this. Let me run the code and you can see it's running, success, no rows returned. So now this should work. I did it. What should I do next? Can I open the app? Like so. And it starts to work. And he says, yes, you can open it right now. Since it's plain HTML with no build step, just open File Explorer and navigate to outputs. To test the full flow, register, create an account with a display name, email and password. Check Supabase database, tables, profiles to confirm your profile row was auto-created by the trigger. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to go over to my folder. Let me press index, for example. Here we can create an account, we can sign in. So let's create an account. For the display name, I'm going to use MPC, email mpc@gmail.com, password, let's use MPC123, doesn't matter, create account. The password must have at least 8 characters. So 4 and 5, create account, please wait. Email mpc@gmail.com is invalid. Let me use a longer email like so. Account created. Actually, I forgot the email. And we somehow have to confirm our email. That is probably pretty bad. And actually, we still have authentication on. So it tells us to go to authentication, provider's email, and toggle confirm email off. And now after chatting a little bit, because I don't know a lot about this, it told me that I have to go to sign-in, providers. And right here, I just have to turn off confirm email. Email, confirm email should be turned off, sign in, email not confirmed. So I think I have to create another account. So let me just create another random account. So I'm going to create another account right now. So this one essentially again, and I'm just going to add an A, name, NPC, password, NPC12345. Create account. We created an account and it already logged us in. Now I can, for example, add a friend. Let me first of all sign out and I'm going to save this email. I will create another account. I will use the exact same email and just add an A. And then I'm going to use NPC1, for example. And I'm going to use NPC12345 again. Create account. It logs us in. Let's maybe add NPC. So let's add this one. User not found. So maybe I have to use another account. So I'm going to do another one, another A. Maybe NPC12345, NPC2, create account, user already registered. So maybe another A, I don't know. And now let's add NPC1. Actually, I have to use the email, that was my bad. So maybe 2 A's, add, maybe 3 A's, add, and so on. So I think you get the idea. And I added those friends. And maybe I have to sign out, go to another account, 2 A's, NPC12345, sign in. And you can see we have to accept that message. So accept, I accepted that one. And now I can chat. So, hello, how are you doing, bro? And now I can sign out and go to my other account. And I think it was 4 A's, I'm not sure. NPC12345, sign in. And you can see we have this message. Hello, how are you doing? I'm doing good. How about you? Thanks for asking. And it's as easy as that to create a simple chat app. And I know it was a little bit forth and back, but if you think about creating a chat app for the first time in literally probably 20 minutes, that is really crazy. And I would say that this chat app is really, really good. So if you would learn those technologies and try to create this chat app, it would probably take you like 2 or 3 years to learn all of this, especially if you want to make it secure. And I'm going to be honest, I'm not entirely sure whether this is super secure now or not. And if you really want to create apps that need to be super secure, I would never trust Claude AI entirely. If you really want to make sure that your app is 100% secure, I would, for example, pay someone to take a look over the code. But especially for front-end web development, so HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, where your security risk is a lot less, Claude AI is already great in my opinion. And I think that the security risk will also get less and less in the future, because Claude AI also already announced that the next model is especially designed to find errors and reduce security risk. So essentially to improve security. And the next model that Claude AI releases has the name Mytho or Mytho as far as I know. And as mentioned, that one should especially focus on reducing security risks, as far as I know. But you will see in the future. I think this here already demonstrates how powerful Claude AI is currently. And now there's only one thing missing, and that is essentially deployment. And I want to show you how to deploy a front-end application for free, because maybe some of you are as broke as me. So I will show you how to deploy it to GitHub, especially since a lot of you might want to push their projects to GitHub anyways. And deploying to GitHub is actually pretty easy. You're just going to go over to Google, you're going to search for Git, and now you need to install Git. So before deploying, I would recommend you to install it for Windows. So just press this button right here, install for Windows. If you have Mac OS, of course you use Mac OS, but I have Windows. So I press Git for Windows, choose the setup essentially, the sort of standalone installer. Then you wait for this here to finish, and then you're just going to follow all of those steps. So we're going to press yes, next, 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 and you just press next all of the time. It doesn't really matter too much. And then you press install, and this will install Git for you. Maybe you don't even have to follow all of the steps, because I have to uninstall it as it seems before installing it, but you just have to follow the steps essentially. And then you will have Git on your machine, and then you should be good to go. So now it finished installing Git. So next up, we are going to go over to GitHub, because we will push our website to GitHub. So you just press this link right here. And now you should be on this page right here. You can then sign up if you don't have an account yet, or you can just sign in if you already have an account. I already have an account, so I will just sign in. Now I'm signed in, and now I can create a new project. So I'm going to press new. It should look like this for you as well, or pretty similar. And now you can use or define a project name, a repository name, essentially, which is pretty much a project name in GitHub. So this could be cool project, doesn't matter. You could add a description, doesn't matter though. And then you're just going to press create repository, for example. And now you can literally just copy those lines right here, go over to Claude AI and paste them in and say, please push my project. Now let's take a look. What kind of project do we want to add? Maybe coffee shop. So please push my project coffee minus shop in the outputs folder to this GitHub repository, like so. Let's press enter, like so. Also, something that I didn't mention up to this point is that right here, you can see your context use from time to time. So if you would click on this right here, it would be similar to essentially, let me press yes. So it would be similar to essentially just use /compact, like so. And once the context is essentially full, it will auto-compact. So it will essentially reduce your messages to only a couple of important informations. So by clicking, you essentially execute /compact and reduce your context. And usually I would recommend you to just press this right here from time to time to essentially auto-compact your context and reduce the amount of context you have. And now right here, you can see that it pushed our coffee shop to the repository. So let's go back to the repository. We can now just go or click on the project folder. You can see we now have CSS, HTML, and JS instead of the folders. So it essentially just submitted all of our folders, so all of our files, to this GitHub repository. So this is now essentially our entire project. And now other developers can see our project if they want to. So we can also take a look at it. So this is our about.html, index.html, menu.html, and so on. So let's go back to cool project. And now we can release this project by just going over to settings, so right here. And inside of the settings tab, we have to go over to pages. And right here, we can go to none and just choose main. And now we have to save this. And this will automatically create a URL for our project. And after probably 1 or 2 minutes most of the time, you should see your URL and you should be able to see your project in the web. So let me show you. Let's go to Cool Project right here. This will take a short time. You can see it's currently working, so deployment is in progress. And now you can see our page has been deployed. So I can just press this right here. And this will now redirect us to our project link. So this here's our link. Let's click this and we're getting this error. So I'm going to copy this right here to Claude AI, like so. And I'm going to say, I am getting this error. And the reason for this error, I can already tell you, or you can just read, is that we're not having an index.html inside of the root directory. So right now we have it inside of the HTML folder, and that is not the structure that GitHub expects us to add. So usually the index.html file should be within this folder right here, so within the root folder. So now Claude AI has to modify this, and it will do, and afterwards it will likely add that to our GitHub project, and then it should work. So it pushed it. Let's take a look at the coffee shop website. You can see it added the index.html right here, so into the root directory. And now it also pushed it to GitHub, so this should work. Let me reload the page. You can see we now have index.html right here in the root directory. You can see it is now deploying again. The page now has been deployed, so let's press this here again. Let's press this link, and you can see we now have our coffee shop website online. So we can reach this website by using this URL right here. We also have the menu page, the about page, visit, and everything seems to work. So I see it's as simple as that to push a website to a URL, and everyone can now access this page. So I could take this website right here, so this URL, and send it to a friend, for example. And I think it's also important that you see a lot of those mistakes along the way, because I want you to understand that Claude AI is not perfect. You still have to do a little bit of the stuff yourself, but you can always ask Claude AI. Claude AI will always give you instructions, and in the end, me personally at least, I always got the result that I was looking for. So it's not really a magic tool that will get you the perfect result immediately. But by iterating, you get better and better results. And I think this is pretty much all you really need to know about Claude AI for web development. And I think from here, you can pretty much learn all of the stuff that is still necessary yourself. But I'm certain that you have all of the tools necessary to create pretty much anything you like. So I hope you enjoyed this course. I hope it was helpful. And besides that, I hope you're having a great day, and I see you guys.